Right. So, you are welcome to stay after the class to talk about everything in my office hour. So let's jump straight to pitch. Regarding the question, in which of the following structures the temporal frequencies of sound waves of sound are spatially separated? Well, the pinna, the ear, no, right? They are not separated. In the outer ear, all the frequencies pass through. All the frequencies, maybe they are filtered a little bit, but they are not separated. Auditory canal, the same. The tympanic membrane, the middle ear, and the ossicles, they also they transmit the vibrations, and they transform them all into the same vibrations that the steep transmits into the cochlea, into the liquid inside, but it's the entire range of the sound that reaches. The oval window the same, so it's in the basilar membrane, in the cochlea, where the sounds, the different frequencies are analyzed and separated. And today we are going to talk a lot about it. So half of you got it right. It's E. Let me close it. So today we're going to talk about that, how the cochlea separates these frequencies. And then we'll cover two alternative or parallel, but different theories about how our auditory system codes these frequencies that determine how we perceive different pitches. And then we'll see two applications, cochlear implant and virtual pitch. So just to remind you from last time, we have the outer ear with the pinna and the auditory canal, and then we have the middle ear with the eardrum, the incus, the malleus, and the stapes, and the vibrations from the air are transmitted into the inner ear through the oval window into the cochlea, which there is liquid inside. And so this is the cochlea, and if we unroll it, we have this graphical design depiction. So this is the oval window, the footplate of the stapes, and we have two separated vestibuli. One is called the upper one vestibular, the lower one tympani, and they are connected in the apex of the cochlea. And this is a cross section, so we have, this is the basilar membrane, and it goes longitudinally along the cochlea, right? And we have, so this is the tectorial membrane that, according to the vibrations of the liquid inside the cochlea, this one, the tectorial membrane moves from left to right, and the basilar membrane moves up and down. And these movements of the tectorial membrane rubs on the cilia that are these little hair. It's not a cell. It's a little thing on the top of each hair cells. These are our receptors, our sound receptors, the outer and the inner hair cells. Here we can see it better. And so these are the cilia on the top of each hair cell. These are inner hair cells. And they are connected by tip links, and whenever they are tilted, they stretch these channels that let ions enter inside the cell, which results in the cell firing. And here we can see it better. And we also saw, and this is important for what we are going to talk today, that this movement works like a light switch. When it tilts to one side, it opens the channels and then it fires, and when it stands, it closes. So according to the movement of the tectorial membrane that is perfectly synchronized with the vibrations of the liquid inside the cochlea, then the cells, they fire at exactly the same rate, the same frequency of the vibration, which is exactly the same frequency of the sound that reached our ears. Right? Okay, so this is our basilar membrane unfolded. So vibrations are, as I just said, transmitted from the steps through the oval window that is just above the base, here above the base of the membrane. Now the basilar membrane is thicker and narrower here, and thinner and wider here. And this is very important because these physical properties of this tissue allows it to vibrate differently according to the frequencies. Now, imagine that you take a rubber band and you stretch it and then you pluck it. If you put your ear close to it, you even hear sound depending how you stretch it. Now, if you ever tried it, when you pluck it, if you stretch it, it will vibrate faster, and when you release it, it will vibrate slower. And the sound will go accordingly. It will be a higher pitch. It will... Now, this shows that I'm giving this example just to, as an example, why the different physical properties of the tissue react differently in terms of vibration to different frequencies. Now, the basilar membrane remains, it's not stretched, it remains with the same tension all the time, meaning that when it oscillates, when it vibrates according to the sound that was transmitted, it vibrates in exactly the same frequency all along it. But because it's thicker here and thinner here, and also wider and narrower, different areas of this tissue, they react differently to that specific frequency, that specific vibration. Okay? So, given a specific sound with a specific frequency, specific oscillation, the entire membrane will oscillate in the same frequency. Now, what happens here, we see on the bottom, we see different time points of the vibration of the membrane. So the wave, it moves from left to right, but at each point the part of the membrane remains in the same position. Imagine like I don't know, a duck sitting on a lake, or on when the waves pass by, the waves move, or they seem to move in a certain direction, but the duck goes up and down, it remains in the same position. The molecules of water, they don't move, only the wave moves. It's like in a stadium, when the audience make waves. So you see the wave moving around the stadium, but the people only stand and sit down. Okay? So this is a wave going through the basilar membrane, and this is the envelope. The envelope means the entire space within which a wave covers, let's say. So here, each point in the basilar membrane goes only up and down, even though the wave moves from right to left. Now these green lines are the double of the amplitude of the wave. This is just because it's not accurate, right? The amplitude is from the middle to the highest point. So what happens is that different frequencies result in different envelopes, meaning that different parts of the membrane will have higher and lower amplitudes in different places according to the frequency. Now here we can see it better. This is 25 Hertz, which is below our lower threshold. We start to hear sound above 35 or 40 Hertz. Although 25 Hertz, we may feel it in our stomach, but we don't hear it. So a pure tone, this is a pure tone of 25 Hertz, will oscillate the entire membrane at 25 Hertz across its entire length. But different parts, because they have different thickness and different wider and there, different parts will oscillate higher or lower. And we can see here that the higher, this is the envelope of the wave, okay? The entire area. Stop me, any questions, stop me, or write in if I don't see in the chat, interrupt me. Okay, so the higher the frequency, a different part of the basilar membrane reaches its highest amplitude. As we can see here, the highest the frequency, the highest amplitude is closer to the base. The lowest the frequency, the highest amplitude is closer to the apex. In the apex, our basilar membrane is reacts more to lower tones, and in the base to higher tones. Okay? Now, as I just said, these are only pure tones, and in nature, in the real world, all the sounds that reach our ears are complex tones. They are air pressure waves that simultaneously include a lot of harmonics, different waves at the same time. So here we have...
Rick, I think
yes?
you're too dark.
I am too dark. Thank you. Please remind if it happens again. Thanks. So here we have a complex tone. And we have here 440 Hertz, 880, 1320. So this complex sound, it's simultaneously these three frequencies at the same time comprise this entire airwave. So it comes from the outer ear to the middle ear, and then the stapes transmit here. This is our basilar membrane, right? This is the base, this is the apex. So the lower tones, the highest amplitude is reached towards the apex, and the frequency, it's closer to the base. So here we can clearly see that these three tones together, this sound that is comprised by these three tones, each one at the same time, its highest amplitude is reached at a very specific narrow area in the basilar membrane. Okay? Now, and it occurs at the same time. Is it clear? Okay. Now, as you can, I don't know if you realize, these numbers, these frequencies, they are multiples of 440, right? And later we will see when it's important. So this is a short movie, an animation that shows us what happens in the basilar membrane.
So here we are with a view of the cochlea. The cochlea now uncoils, and we look at the basilar membrane, and now see what happens when we play individual tones. Now a chord, and finally something really complex. So I kid you not. I mean, this is really what's going on in your ear all the time. It's rather amazing, isn't it? This, for those of you with a mathematical bent, is rather like what's called spectral analysis or Fourier analysis. You break down a waveform into its different sinusoidal components, because each and every waveform that's out there, every sound you can hear, can be described as the sum of a series of sine and cosine waves. And that's exactly what this apparatus does.
Good. Good, right? Good. Yeah. All right, so what we have here is a single fiber of the eighth cranial nerve. If you remember, we have 12, from Introduction to Psychology, I suppose, 12 cranial nerves, and the eighth one is the one that transmits all the auditory information. So this is a fiber that is connected, one fiber that is connected to one single outer hair cell. And this is the activity of this neurofiber. This is a single cell recording of this single nerve that is connected to one. It's a cat, I think. I think it's in a cat. So what we see here is the activity of these, it's the threshold actually, which is the activity of this neurofiber according to the frequency of the sound and the intensity of the sound in decibels. Okay? So what we see is that this specific hair cell, or this specific nerve that is connected to these specific hair cells, when the frequency of the sound is around 5,000 hertz, it needs only around 20 decibels. But for all other frequencies around here, it will also react, but it needs beyond 70 decibels to start firing. So this very narrow range of frequencies to which this outer hair cell is responsive to, is sensitive to, this is called the characteristic frequency of this hair cell. All right? So different hair cells at different locations along the basilar membrane are sensitive to very specific and narrow ranges of frequencies. Now you tell me, these hair cells here, where are they in the basilar membrane? Anyone wants to try? High frequencies in the basilar membrane. Where in the basilar membrane the highest amplitude is reached for high frequencies sounds? Base or apex? Apex! No! Base. It's one or two. No. In the base, the envelope reaches its highest peak close to the base, and for low frequencies, the highest amplitude of the oscillation of the basilar membrane is close to the apex here. All right? You must remember that for the end of your life, this is extremely important. How can you even think about having children without... This joke is going nowhere, so I'll stop it. So, okay. So these are the two main theories about how we code pitch frequencies in our auditory system. Until today, the entire picture of neurocoding is not fully understood. But we understand enough. And these are the two big theories, I think. So this is the same Helmholtz that we saw in color perception. And this is Clive Weaver. So we'll begin with the place code theory, which began with Johannes Müller, and the idea of the law of specific nerve energies goes like this. From one side, all our neurons, they are very simplistic and dumb devices. They either fire or not fire, and all they can do is fire at different frequencies. So how come our system, our, later parts of our brain can so clear differentiate information and ascribe it two very discernible sensations that we have between our different senses. How is it that the brain, when it receives neuronal activity from somewhere, can interpret it as touch or vision or hearing, etc.? So the simple answer is that it depends from where it comes, right? Now, let's do a small demonstration of that. Close your eyes, and then with your finger, carefully, before it hurts, and close your eyes also with the other hand, okay? So no light will enter through the eyelids. And press on the corner of your eye, press your eye and wiggle it lightly. Before you feel pain, play with it. And tell me if you perceive something, if you feel something, if you see something. Close with the other hand the eyelid, so it will be dark inside your eye, and then wiggle it. So until someone tells me something, I will not continue.
Is it, I can't really describe it, but undescribable light?
Yes, you see light. Can you say you see flashes of light, right? Did anyone feel that it comes from any specific direction? Outer edge, yes, reddish. So these are called phosphenes. What happens is like this. Yes, we see flashes of light. So if you press from this corner, you see the phosphenes as if it comes from somewhere, but there was no light. There was no light coming. There was no light difference. So what happens is that when you press, when you move that inside, some of the cells, the receptors, all the mass that we have, it's not the photoreceptors. But between the photoreceptors, if you remember, the photoreceptors are closest to the epithelium. And between your eyeball and the epithelium, you have all the amacrine, bipolar, and ganglion cells, right? So when you press physically, some of those cells, because of physical, they fire. They fire. You know, they are cells swimming on liquid with ions, and so movement, physical movement, makes some electric potentials to electricity to disenchain, and they fire. So this activity reaches our brain, and all our brain knows is that activity from those neurons means light. And that's why we see this illusion, these phosphenes, which is obviously not because of light. Now, Helmholtz, he was Müller's student, and he extended Müller's theory. And he suggested that not only neuronal activity coming from our ears is interpreted as sound, but specifically neuronal activity coming from specific areas along the basilar membrane, which, as we saw, react differently, right? To different frequencies, is interpreted as different specific pitches. So according to the place theory, the main determinant of the perception of a specific pitch is the specific area along the basilar membrane at which that activity originates. And it's nothing to do with the pattern of firing of that neuronal activity. Clear? Simple, right? The temporal code theory. So if the place theory proposes that pitch is determined by which neurons fire, the temporal code theory focuses on how these neurons fire, irrespective of which neurons are firing. So as we saw before, our hair cells, at least for lower frequencies, meaning as long our cells, our neurons, there is a limit, a ceiling, how fast neurons can fire. But at least for low and until middle range of sound frequencies, our hair cells can fire exactly locked phase with the frequency of the sound. Locked phase because they are locked to the phase of the sound wave. Okay? The problem, and that pattern, the frequency of the firing of those hair cells, which determines the frequency, the firing rate of the auditory nerve cells that reach the brain. They are what our brain uses to interpret which pitch we are hearing. Now the problem is that what about high frequency sounds that are beyond the maximum firing rate of human neurons? So the temporal code theory suggests that it's done through what is called the volley principle. That is, later neurons along the auditory pathway, they receive activity from many fibers that are connected to different hair cells at the same time. And when you combine these rates together, they are reacting at the same time to the same sound. But when you combine them together, you can technically, mathematically, you can reach all the highest frequencies, firing rates, this combination of the highest frequencies of sound that we still hear. We hear until 20,000 hertz, from 40 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Dogs, if I'm not mistaken, can hear up to 40,000 hertz. But 20,000 hertz is not a sound anymore. We cannot perceive it as pitch. It's like, how do you call it? How do you call it? Like, you understand what I'm saying, right?
Tone?
It's not, no, it's not a tone. A tone means that tone is a pitch. When like a mosquito, like there is a word in English. Buzz, yeah. When sometimes we have wine. Yeah. When a dog whistle, sometimes when it's lower frequencies, we hear this. It's the highest noise. No, ringing would be something that goes up and down. But never mind, you understand. Yeah, in tinnitus sometimes we like the highest noise that we hear. Never mind the word. You understand what I mean, right? Okay. So the place theory is the idea that frequency is we perceive pitch by according to where the neuronal activity comes from along the basilar membrane, and the temporal code proposes that it's according to the frequency. Both are right. Both have a lot of empirical evidence to back it, supported by a lot of effects and a lot of and they don't have to go, they are not mutually exclusive, and they are more relevant to different effects, different parts of our processing along the entire auditory neural pathway. Anyone that can say it with the proper Hungarian accent? Bekesi. So he received a Nobel Prize for understanding exactly this spatial separation along the basilar membrane. I don't know when he got it, but he got it. Okay, so here we can see this is a simplification of what would be the activity of our hair cells along the basilar membrane, assuming only one of the two theories. So here we have lower frequency, and here we have a lower frequency, a high frequency, high frequency. These are hair cells positioned at a certain point, a certain area in the basilar membrane, and this is another. So according to the place theory, the firing, the spikes are represented by these vertical lines, okay? So according to the place theory, here we have a lower frequency sound. So only these hair cells will fire and these hair cells will not. So position 1, where in the basilar membrane are they? Please. Is either base or apex. Say it's 50% chance that you got it right. It's the apex, that's right. In the apex reacts more to lower frequencies, and the base reacts more to higher frequencies. So those outer hair cells, I don't know, outer and inner also, in the apex will fire, but in the base they will not fire for this lower, while for a high frequency those in the base will fire and the apex will not. And the temporal code, according to the temporal code theory, all of them will fire for both frequencies, but they will fire according to the frequency of the sound. Exactly in sync, locked in phase. So for a higher frequency, they will fire with a higher rate. Clear? Very simple. Good. Okay. According to the place theory, the difference between hearing a high pitch versus a low pitch results from place, where in the basilar. So the frequency with which an inner cell responds, the frequency with which an auditory nerve cells respond, which auditory nerve cells respond, how many. C, which cells are reacting more, right? This is the place theory. The idea that it depends on from where the main activity along the basilar membrane comes. So the answer is C. Is it who is it clear why? Because the answers were not. No? Anyone? It's clear, good. Where are we? Dina, what is that? What does it mean, this? I don't know the symbol. It's... Okay. Let's move on. I didn't know that. I cannot understand emojis. I cannot. People send me emojis and all kinds of that. For me, I don't understand what's the feeling, what's the meaning of that, what that thing is. I don't use it. Like arrows pointing up. Like, okay. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Cochlear implants. So, we talked about this disease. Really, this is a big thing. This is one of the... This makes a huge difference in so many people's life. We talked about losing hearing loss is tragic. It's a big thing, and we also talked about the fact that many deaf people, they consider their deafness part of their identity, and they they refuse. I don't know if it's until today. I think so. I had a part of a documentary that I wanted to show you. I didn't find it, but anyways, until today, I think deaf parents refuse to well. But irrespective of the disease, nowadays this is a very well-established technology. It's widely accepted. It's a very successful procedure and done a lot. And if I'm not mistaken, it's covered by most health insurances. And it's a neuroprosthetic. It's an implant. So what we have is we all know it. We see it around. So behind the ear there is a microphone that is attached to a frequency analyzer. The battery is here. Because it's larger, it's usually hidden, I don't know, somewhere else. We usually see only this. And the frequency analyzer it analyzes and separates the frequency and sends this information to the receiver that is implanted. This is number 4, that is implanted under the skin, between the skull and the skin. And the receiver sends, according to the frequencies analyzed, electric signals to this long wire that is full of electrodes along its length that is implanted inside along the rolled up cochlea. How, you ask me, how do they implant it inside the cochlea? I think that very carefully. Anyways, so the frequency analysis determines which parts of the electrode are activated simultaneously at the same time, according to the sound analyzed. And this long wire with the electrode inside, it stimulates the basilar membrane accordingly at different places in the right time. And it works pretty well. So this is a real experiment that was run back in the 70s when they were developing this technology of the cochlear implants. It was in the Stanford University, and it was done with real people. So 3 electrodes, they were placed at different points along the basilar membrane, electrodes 1, 2, and 3. And each time only one electrode emitted an electrical signal. And at each trial, one of the electrodes fired and it emitted the electric signal in a different frequency, randomly. So here on the bottom we can see the different frequencies emitted. They are mostly low frequencies. And these, the 3 electrodes placed in different areas, in different places along the basilar membrane. What we see here on the ordinate is the reaction of the patient. So this is in centimeters. What they did is that they did it like this with their hands, an estimation, a translation, I don't know, of how they perceive the pitch, the sound. It's not a sound because it was electricity from the electrodes, but they perceived a sound. So they did like this according to the pitch that they heard. So this is in centimeters. So low, medium, and high. So they were all these points. Each one is a trial, and probably also different. We can hardly see different patients, and they were doing like this every time they heard the sound. Okay, is it clear? Now, let's look at this. Looking at these results, which of these 2 parts, these 2 graphs, it's the same, yes? I just separated in 2. Which one supports the place theory? And which one supports the temporal? Let's begin with the place theory, according to which we perceive sound, according to where the neurons along the basilar membrane, where they fire more. The right graph. Star, do you want to try to tell us why you think so, or am I being annoying?
I was just thinking because of the way that they're like evenly split up.
Yes, it doesn't matter what was the frequency of the pseudo sound, the electricity. It doesn't matter where it was, which electrode. It doesn't matter which frequency it was. Their perception was determined by where the electrode was placed, right? So apparently, if this electrode was all the time, irrespective of the frequency, this electrode, every time it was activated, led to a perception of a high frequency, it means that it was close to the base or to the apex. Base or apex? I don't know why I'm insisting. Base. Yep. Higher frequencies in the base, lower frequencies in the apex. And this was closer to the apex. All right. So, what we see here on the left, anyone wants to try to explain what we see? Does it support the temporal coding or the place coding? Temporal. Mao, wanna try to explain? Because the frequency affects, because it's positively correlated, right? The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch perceived. But they were also separated, the three lines, the three electrodes, meaning that for the same frequency, Carmela, okay. Okay, thank you, Carmela. Let me know if you want to talk later, okay? So for the same frequency, these electrodes consistently, for all the frequencies, this electrode consistently resulted in a perceived higher pitch. So for the same frequency, this was higher than this and then this. So this part and this part, they support both theories and at the same time. Which results would support only the temporal coding theory, but not the place theory? Anyone? Arturo, I can see you thinking. Think, Arturo, think. So, if this positive correlation, as Maho said, shows us that the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch perceived, which supports the temporal coding theory. But the consistent difference between the three places along the basilar membrane, the consistent difference in this area means that the place theory is also relevant here. So it would be only one line on the graph, perfectly, Mao. It would be three superimposed lines on with a positive correlation. Perfect. Right? Right. Next. Virtual pitch. This is interesting for those of you that are into music. So, I'm going to play sounds, annoying sounds, so take control of the volume. If it's too high, lower it, okay? So what we have here, first I'll play, this is a pure tone, 2 pure tones, and these 2 are complex tones according to this spectral analysis, all right? So this is a 400. This is an 800. Okay, now I'm going to play this complex tone, and you're going to tell me to which one of those 2 it sounds similar. So again. Sorry. Oh, it's... Now this one. To which one? The pitch. Again. To the 400. Everybody agrees? Yes. Yes. It sounds a completely different tone. But the pitch sounds like 400. Now this is a pure tone, and this is all these guys together. Now tell me what this one, well, it's written here, but... Ugh. Right? The tone, the pitch of this is also 800. Now, how does it work? So, this sound, this complex sound, has what is called its fundamental, its identity is 400, because they are all multiples of 400. Now, the fundamental is not necessarily the lowest sound. It's the sound that, if you remember from high school, the greatest common factor of all these different numbers is 400, right? So here the greatest common factor is 800. So 800 is the fundamental of this complex sound. Now note that this one, the 400 plus harmonics, includes all those. But we hear it as 400 because that's the fundamental. Now, even if the 400 was not here, we would still perceive it as a 400 pitch. And that's what is called a virtual pitch. We can see it here. So this is a complex with the fundamental 400, this with 800, and here we don't have 400, but the fundamental is 400, right? We all agree. Now let's hear it. Right? Now, this sounds like this. Completely different, but the pitch is the same. Everybody heard it? Yes? You want me to play again? Because it's so nice. So this is called the illusion of the missing fundamental. These here are inside both this and both this, but we hear it completely different. So it's just like what we saw with colors, that our perception, our interpretation is only related to the physical stimuli that reaches our receptors. But it's not perfectly correlated, and it cannot discern between different combinations of physical energy. So just like we had metamers with the colors, here we have the same pitch for completely different physical energy. Here we also have one more thing, which is the timbre, because we do hear it, this and this, even though it's the same pitch, they have different identities, they feel different. Okay, so this is a complex tone. Let's see how it works. So this is a Fourier analysis, right? So here we have 200 hertz, 400 hertz, 600 hertz, 800 hertz. And if we combine these four sound waves together, we have this one wave. And as we can see, the fundamental here, which is the highest, the greatest common factor, is 200 hertz, which means one cycle every 5 milliseconds, all right? So this is the fundamental. We can see that this complex sound, it repeats itself just like the fundamental every 5 milliseconds, right? And even if we remove the 200 hertz sound within it, it will still, this is 2, 3, and 4, right? It will still repeat itself in the same frequency every 5 milliseconds, all right? Even though it's a different sound. Because mathematically, the greatest common factor for these three numbers is still 200. And this is timbre. So here, what we have here is a guitar. This is the frequency analysis of a guitar playing a sound with 196 hertz, and a saxophone playing the same. We hear the same tone, the same note, but they sound completely different because they are comprised by different waves. This is, by the way, the chromatic scale, so a Do, 440. And an octave, which is the same pitch, like Do, Do, Da. So every 8 notes, full notes, they sound the same, just one octave up. And these are multiples of 440 hertz, right? This is what's called the Shepard pitch illusion. Let me play it. It's a funny one because we perceive it as a never-ending, a continuous increase in something. It's increasing all the time. But how come it can continue? Dunkirk, yes? I don't remember if I saw it. I saw it, yes, Dunkirk. Yes, they used it. I didn't know. Where, why? Ah, like, okay. Like an emotionally disconcerting sound for some sequences. Okay, yeah, yeah. Yes, it feels suspenseful, exactly. It never ends. But what is happening is that different, at each point, different frequencies become louder and louder, and they change themselves. So all the time there is something, it's the same frequencies, but each time the amplitude of each one goes up and up. And it's so this is a visual translation of that frequency from Auditory. Okay, so this is time and frequency. So these lines, they move all the time from left to right. And it's exactly the same idea of MC Escher. It's funny because the way we perceive it, we can look at it infinitely. Our perception cannot make sense of this. Because, yeah, you got the idea. We have finished with pitch. Next week, we are going to cover loudness, and then localization. And then on the 10th of May, our last lecture, last day of the semester, we are going to have a party. No. But I still don't know what we'll cover. And maybe I'll ask you guys what you would like me to talk about. I'll give you options, or maybe even you want to suggest me to go deeper into something that you want to hear more about it. Okay? Questions, comments, anything?